Hey, welcome back to the Uprawr podcast. Today's guest is Steve Tannett, the top dog at Marshall Records, the label division of the world famous Marshall amps. We talk about what a record label does, how they should work, and how they started Marshall Records. We also talk about how indie labels emerged and what life was like in the 80s working with some of the biggest indie labels in the UK at the forefront of the punk movement. So please like, subscribe, and let's get into it.
So I think the first thing to start with is, what is a record label and what actually do they do?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the record label business is a very mature business now. I mean, record labels, as we know, have been, going since the 1940s, 50s. So, but there's been so many changes in the landscape for artists, really. And I think the most important developments in record labels have been the empowerment of artists, and that's come through the dreaded internet and streaming and so on. But what it has done is it's actually given opportunities to bands to really be independent, and I have endless discussions with my team about, are we providing the right kind of facilities for artists in terms of, are our deals fair? Do we provide something that they can't get from just putting out their records themselves and putting them up on DistroKid or whatever? And so we've really worked hard over the last 6 or 7 years with the backing of Marshall to try and create something that is different. There are a lot of different offerings. So when someone says, what is a record label? Well, they just come in so many shapes and sizes now. And, if you look at, the traditional record label structure, Warner's or a Sony or EMI or as was, I mean, those were all about the power that the record companies held over distribution. Because if you wanted to put a record out, well, firstly, you had to press them. Secondly, you had to get them into shops. So in the late 70s, when I first came into the business, it was at the sort of advent of, the 7-inch revolution that came out of punk rock. So Rough Trade, Beggars Banquet, these places. And I was making records myself with my band Menace, a punk rock band. And that was the first big sea change, really, where record labels, Miles Copeland, who was the head of, at that point, a company called Faulty Products, which had 2 or 3 labels, actually: Illegal Records, Step Forward Records, Deptford Fun City. He and Jeff Travis at Rough Trade and Martin Mills over at Beggars Banquet, Ian McNay at Cherry Red, all these people were basically doing what the majors didn't want to do. The majors were happy to sign the Clash because the Clash were big, but there were hundreds of bands that were making records, and include the Buzzcocks in that, or loads of bands, right? And those bands, before they were getting to major record labels, were figuring out that actually we can release 7 inches and these will sell, and so the independent label scene, which came from that, I think that's where the groundwork was laid for the business as we see it today. So a record label's primary function is to assist the artist in putting music into the market in the most effective way. And I still believe that whilst an artist can do everything pretty much independently, buy in every service, buy label services. So everything that could be done by all of those individual services, they're available to every act. But when you get a group of people, and you'll notice from Uprawr and the sort of spirit that you put around your patronage of artists, in your chosen, field, being on a record label just means that you get a number of like-minded people together to try and help put the artist first and get them to where they need to be. And so I think record labels are really important. I think they do provide a really important function, but they are not the only way to be in this business.
Yeah, to get your music out there.
But I think, you know, what is a record label? It's a group of people who work together to try and increase the potential for the artist to have a career.
So if a band is looking to get a record deal, then what are the different types of deal that they could be presented with?
Well, certainly that's there's myriad options, right? So when we created Marshall Records, we created something that was designed to provide the artist with more equitable terms on the revenues, because, you know, there are a lot of deals around. You know, the original record deals for artists would be a royalty, you know, sort of 20%, 18%, 15%, 12% in the old days, and lots of different deductions when they worked out how to actually pay the artist. So I think the big change came when it was, okay, what's the most equitable split we can give a band? 50-50. Okay, 50-50. Wow, okay, so that's after paying for the videos and the tour support and paying for a PR campaign. If you're hiring outside people, the split of the proceeds was 50%. We upped that to 75%, and people said, that's insane. How can a record company, you know, live on that? And of course, Marshall is different. We don't live on the profit from a record. We're selling other things. But the average deal for a record company with for a band with a record label should be no less than 50% of the proceeds after the costs have been covered.
Is that sort of typical today?
That is pretty much now. I mean, you'll still get record labels. It's an important definition to remember, which I think a lot of people forget, right? This is still a risk-return business. Not so much for Marshall, because, as I say, we're in other businesses. You know our amps, right? Yeah. So, but let's say a record company that just exists purely to release music. Well, there's got to be some upside for them. It's not all, they've got to live on it, right? So 50%, I think, after the costs have been recovered, because the record label should be paying for the recording, should be paying for the videos, should be paying to promote the music, and in return, the artist is granting the rights to that company to exploit their music in as many ways as they can. The 50% net share, I think, is the fairest way, and I think any record labels that say, oh, well, we'll give you 20% or 30%, I just think that's out of date. And I think 50-50 split after recovery of the costs is fair. That's what I think.
When the band is recovering the costs and they're recouping, where does that money come from, and how would they see the split?
Well, that comes in from revenues from selling streaming. So, obviously we know that streaming revenues are small, but they do come in, and some bands get into the, 100 million streams, there is some money. And if your, algorithm is good and you keep streaming and you've got a catalog that builds, that will, flow through in time. So that is one way of recovering that money. The other way, of course, is selling vinyl. Vinyl is expensive to make, but if a band has a following and the record company are putting that vinyl into the market, the vinyl can produce much needed revenue. And CDs, and obviously bands have the opportunity to buy stock from the record label, who are putting up the cost of making it and paying the publishing costs and so on. So, and then the band can sell that on tour. So they get double return, because they're not only paying in to recover the costs of putting that record out, but they're also selling it at a profit on their merch table. So these are the primary ways. And then, of course, there are the societies that will collect performance royalties, PPL, and so on. I mean, publishing is a separate discussion, which we can have, but that's primarily a record company way of the way a record company exists on selling selling those goods via a distributor and collecting those streaming revenues.
When they're paying back the advance then, and you've got your 50-50, is it come in, does all the money come in and you say, I've recouped the money, and then we split it? Or is the split at the start? And
it's, imagine it's 6 monthly periods, right? So you sign a band, you put them in the studio, you pay for the record, you pay the cost of the producer, you put the record out, and 6 months after you've done all those things, the record might not even be out. It might, it may only be coming out. You may have put out a couple of singles, waterfall a couple of singles to streaming. So you won't see the revenues on that record for 12 months. So the most likely scenario is you won't see anything in that first 6 month period. But then in the second 6 month period, when the album's been released, you've hopefully done the vinyl campaign and done your rough trade in-store tour and sold plenty of copies, as you've gone around. That's when, in that second 6 month royalty period, when the company should account to the artist and say, well, okay, well, look, here's what we've collected, right? We got this much in from streaming. That's what we got in from selling the vinyls from the distributor. That's what we got from you buying stock to sell yourselves. And here's what we spent. Cost that much to make them, that much for the publishing, that much for the PR campaign, that much for the videos, and here's what's left. Unfortunately, quite often you spend a lot more than you bring in. So, to get to the artist receiving that 50%, there needs to be a fair bit of income because it's an expensive business.
yeah. So in theory, let's say you've spent £10,000. The artist has brought in £10,000. Is that then recouped, or is it that's split and you take your 50% and then the artist?
That £10,000 comes in to the record label, and so if the label spent 10 grand,
yeah,
collected 10 grand, we're flat, right? So every penny after that is split 50-50.
And is that a Marshall thing, or is that?
No, that's, well, we're too generous. We get 75p
yeah,
in a pound. So, after the costs have come back, but we're also, we spend quite heavily on the artists. So, it's a band like Therapy or on our label are very careful about, how much they spend on the record, and they don't expect us to make really expensive videos, and they tour a lot and they sell a lot of stuff. So when they get their statement, they usually get a positive, and then they get their 75p in every pound. So you'll never get paid by a label until the label has recovered all of the money that it spent. There's a couple of things that are important. We as a record company, as Marshall, we have internal PR. So we have Harris who works for us at Press, and he deals with all the magazines and all that stuff. A lot of artists will go, oh, no, I don't want to use the in-house. I want to use Willful, or I want to use whatever, right? Which is great, but someone's got to pay for it. So if the record label pay for it, they will consider that a cost to the project.
Yeah.
So you're thinking, oh, well, if it's 50-50, then we should only have 50% taken off the statement. No, record company will say, no, that's an outgoing. We have to count that in the cost of project, so that before we get to the 50-50, we've got to get that money back that we've given third party, PR, radio, whoever it is. So just look at it. It's actually quite simple. Just look at it as, right, all the costs that aren't internal will probably come back on your statement. So if you're signed to a record label, band, and the record label turn around and say, and you go, okay, we're going to get our split. We've sold, 2,000 copies or whatever. And the record label will go, well, actually, hang on a minute. Well, we spent $5 grand on that, and we spent $2 grand on that, and $3 grand, and we gave you $8 grand to, it's just a numbers game. It is quite simple. In the old days, it was very complicated because record labels would pay their royalties based on different formulas. So you might be on a 15% royalty, but the calculation of the royalty was based on the cost of the record and what it cost to sell, you know, the record to a store. So the royalty rate was based on an uplifted price that the store, it was a very complicated business. And this is much simpler. It's money in, money out, and a split after the money has been recovered. So I actually think the record business has got fairer for indies. Not necessarily for majors, because majors, again, it's a cost thing, isn't it? You know, a lot of bands' dream is to be signed to Polydor or, you know, Atlantic or whatever. Well, yeah, they want to, they'll spend the money on you, but they won't pay you 50% of the proceeds. They'll keep your rights for much longer periods of time. And yeah, you're not really in control in the same way as you would be with an independent. So it just depends, you know, what your view is as a band. There's nothing wrong with being on a major. You know, it's whatever's right for the band. I mean, I think someone like Lambrini Girls, you know, are not going to exist happily on a major because, number one, they'll probably spray paint the internal walls of their of the office, but you know, basically some bands, you know, it's much better to be releasing music independently or with a group of people who are not trying to hold the rights for very long periods of time, who are trying to encourage the artist to get to a career where their artist is self-sufficient. That's part of what we seek to do at Marshall. You know, what we really want is a band to get to a point where they don't rely on the record label for anything. It's a mutual beneficial. We've got good distribution, we've got good people, we've got good PR. We don't charge internal PR back to the cost. We don't charge the international PR. We retain a PR team in Europe. We pay for it. We don't charge that to the bands, right? So sometimes I think, you know, indies versus majors, it's horses for courses. I've got a lot of friends at majors. A lot of bands would never have had the careers that they have if they weren't on a major. You know?
What's the difference in what a major can bring to it versus an indie?
Money. It's got more money. They just have more money, you know. I mean, yeah, people say, oh, well, they've got more power. I don't know about that. You know, they've got more money and they have, you know, sophisticated distribution and, you know, obviously a lot more clout, if you like, in the world. But I think, you know, with the advent of BBC introducing and the championing of, you know, independent music from, you know, certainly from our national broadcaster, you know, the BBC, I think have done really wonderful work to help artists, you know, right from Dan Carter to Alex to, you know, all of the great supporters of alternative and rock music. You know, I think it's a much better time for artists, and therefore you go, well, what's a major going to do for me? Generally speaking, it's cash. It's the ability to say, well, I might be able to give up my job now because the record label have given us enough for us all to have, you know, some money instead of having no money.
Yeah, so I guess that would be one of the major things, is that the advance is big enough to live on, rather than
I mean, this
having
was
to support yourself separately.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, when I started out, you know, in the 70s, pre-punk bands, you know, getting a record deal was like really, you know, wow, you know, you had to go, you know, prove yourself and be selling out the Marquee Club before even a record label would even, you know, send an A&R down. You know, there was no such thing as, you know, everyone releasing independence. You had studios, and people might take a risk on paying for the band to go in the studio, but then those people wanted to own the rights of the music.
Yeah.
Right? And they might license that band to a major. But generally speaking, major labels controlled what happened in the business.
So what would be the difference then, touching on that, between a record deal and a license deal?
Well, a license deal is where you've already made the record, right? So some way that you and your band have gone into the studio, and you've now got, it's mastered and it's listenable and it's good, and everyone says, right, okay, what are we going to do with that? Well, if you go to a label, Earache or Marshall, or I don't know, pick one, right?
Yes.
And the record's already made, then, and they want to, that sign you, well, then that is a license by definition, because they'll basically say to you, we want to put out that music and control it for a period of time, right? These days, the ability to make records is, everyone's making records. No one's waiting for the label to come along and pay. People just going to studios all the time, making records. So a license, all our deals, actually, again, giving away the Marshall sort of trade secrets, I mean, all our deals are licenses, because after the time that we've got the right to release that music, we just give it back to the bands. So even if we paid for it, we still give it back. We don't keep it. It's theirs.
So what do those rights sort of look like? What is it that you're actually buying the rights to? Is it the physical product, or?
You're buying the rights to exploit that music in mainly recording distribution. And obviously, if you get synchronization requests, you technically control that master. So if someone wants to put that music in an advert, you might not control the music publishing, but you control the master. So if that's been licensed to you, record label, or you've paid for that recording, you would be the one that would say, oh, you want to put that in an advert? Well, in order for you to use that music, we want this much money. Right? And the music publishing, which again, you need to talk about if you're talking about trying to educate musicians.
I guess if we just touch on that sort of slightly, the difference, I think, in that sync scenario is that program or the advert or whatever it is, when they're paying for the music with the record label, they're paying for the actual recorded product. With the publishing, they're paying for the right to use the intellectual property of
that's right,
what that song is.
And they are separate rights, and they are separate collection. And generally speaking, if we've had loads of syncs like that with Nova Twins, for instance.
Yeah.
The music publishing is it's 50-50, so you'll pay, so whoever wants to use the music will have to pay you, the record label, and the music publisher half each of whatever that fee that they've decided they're willing to pay.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, obviously, when a band controls everything, or if you're on a record label partnership, call it what you will, where you're putting all of the rights in, then that can be granted in one place by the whoever's controlling the rights. You don't have to have a music publisher.
Yeah.
That can be controlled by the people you're working with. So we tend to not, we separate sort of between the two. So we have sub-publishing arrangements with another company. If an artist hasn't got a music publisher, we'll say, well, look, we will administer that for you, not for profit, just for good order.
Yeah.
And we'll put it through our sub-publishing arrangement. In this case, we're with Peer Music, who's a big international publishing company. But we've worked with Centric in the past, and it's like I say, the landscape has changed. The control of most of these things is in the artist's hands now, unless you're signing to a major.
So if you're signing and it isn't a license, you are getting the money to record the product, what does it look like in terms of time period and option periods, with how it breaks down and what the deal looks like as it goes on?
This is a really interesting point, because when I I've been in the record business 45 years, from signing record deals to releasing music, and I released a lot of music, with the labels I worked for during the 80s and 90s and the last 8 years or so at Marshall. So the it's so different. I think that's the issue, really. I mean, what was the question again? Just the specific.
So, like signing a deal, say it's a £1 million record deal. How does that break down over the course of the years?
Yeah, I was timing, wasn't it? Yeah,
with option periods and times.
This is a very good point. So, okay, I lost my thread. But that's why I referenced this at the 80s, 90s, right? Is that, when you're a record label, you sign an artist, it was always, right, you've got to sign the band, you have to make the record within a period of time, you have to guarantee to release the record within a period of time, and you have to make a decision if you have an option within a period of time. And they were always really short periods of time, right? And every single instance, it's never long enough, right? And there is a bit of a disconnect, in my opinion, between the amount of time it takes and what a music lawyer will tell an artist and negotiate with a label, either an indie or a distributor or a major, which is, oh, well, we need you to make a decision really quickly and we want the record out in this period of time. And it's like, you know what? Nothing works like that anymore. It takes so long.
Yeah.
I mean, we've just released an album last Friday, by a band called Jen and the Degenerates. We've been 2 years working up to releasing that record. If that was a normal record label, they would have got signed and the record label would have put them in the studio, got the record, put 2 singles out and then put the album out, right? What's the point of that? It's taken 2 years to develop their audience, to find the right way in, to get, tracks waterfalled out through the streaming services, get tracks to radio, to get attention from radio, to find some international markets that are interested in the band. So I look at these periods of time in these record deals and people go, oh, you're saying, how long does it take? Well, should it take 6 months? Should it take a year? I think it takes 2 years. I actually think, obviously, if you're a mature band, that's different, right? You want someone to release your record and when you're going on tour and you need your record for that time, right? So I get that. And that should be shortish periods of time because obviously if the band's got their shit together, you're just helping facilitate their business. But if it's a development artist, a new artist, to me, if a contract says, well, 6 months or I'm like, 6 months, you blink and 6 months is gone. It takes 2 years to get into a cycle where you're even releasing the first album before, you've got to put singles, EP, another EP, it really is. I mean, I think it takes longer and unfortunately more money than everyone thinks. So that issue of control that I talk about, that's why the people you choose to work with is really important, because the expectation of an artist is often not based in reality.
Yeah.
Right. So, the enthusiasm of, oh, well, look, we've done this great record, we want to get it out. And it's like, well, there's no one going to buy it. So, we need to develop some customers for it and so on. The time, my advice is, look at all time periods and add on at least 6 to 9 months because that's what it will take.
Do they have to have specific month time periods, or could an option period just be up when the album is released?
That's what we're trying to do. I think the issue is lawyers, right? When an artist first gets interest, right? So an artist springs up, pick any artist, right? So, and all of a sudden, that's me. No, it's not. It's them. Artist has just had a, BBC introduced a session, and someone's started talking about the band, and they've just picked up an agent, and they get some good supports, and everyone's getting really excited about it. It's like, well, okay, yeah, what then? Is that the moment? Is that when it all takes off? Or you know what I mean? There's so many variables. That's the thing, Jack.
So, touching just back with the lawyers, what's the difference typically with working with a new band lawyer versus like an established? Because one of the things that we see sort of coming through the studios is there's a lot of bands that will bring in their lawyer, but their lawyer's like their dad's mate that might be a divorce attorney, but thinks he can read the contract and doesn't actually understand any of the nuances of what's expected in a music one.
Look, legal advice is it's actually something you can't enter into an agreement without,
yeah.
Right? So obviously, if Marshall come to a band and say, hey, look, we really like this, here's what we're thinking, there has to be a lawyer there, right? The issue with lawyers is obviously they come in all shapes and sizes, right? So you might as well have an experienced lawyer, because if you just have your dad's solicitor who does the conveyancing on his house sale, that's not going to really help you, is it? It might protect you because you've had a legal eye over the document, but it's got no references, right? So I've seen deals get scuppered because the legal advice is out of whack with what is real, right? Generally speaking, music lawyers are doing an incredibly important job, right? Because what they're doing is they're protecting their clients from entering into any deal that might not be good for them in the long run, right? But there is another side to that too, right? Which is that when the lawyer says, oh, well, I don't think that's very good, or you should get better than that, it all depends if anyone wants to give it to you, doesn't it? Because no matter what, it's a choice. This is a business of choice. Most people who want to get record deals or get to the next level in their career are really happy when someone says, hey, I want to help you. But then when the lawyers get involved and the lawyer says, well, I've got better than that for previous clients, so I want that, and I'll take that out, and I don't agree with that, then where does that leave the artist and the person who wants to invest or sign them to their record label? It can be a problem, and it's not guaranteed that your lawyer will get you the best terms. Your lawyer could lose you the deal, right? But they're doing their best. They're doing their job. Everyone's got a job, right? Everyone has to interpret things the way they see it based on their own experience. I've worked with some fantastic lawyers, and I've seen deals go away because we've gone, can't work with those guys because their lawyer just doesn't, he's not living in the real world. So honestly, I don't think there is any...
Before it got to that situation, assuming the band had a manager, would that just be a conversation that you bring up with them? Or
yeah, I mean, again, you're talking managers, right? So here's a really interesting viewpoint on the business, right? Well, the band and the manager are separate businesses, right? So the band have to have an agreement with the manager. So someone has to advise the band in their management agreement with the manager, right? So you can't have the same lawyer. You have to have a separate lawyer because it's a separate business agreement. So you might have a different lawyer for handling the management agreement than you would have for handling the recording agreement, right? So it's, I think the whole issue of legal counsel and how you navigate the business, everyone has a different story, and there is no way that there is a set rule. You know, a good manager wants to get you to the next level because that manager is going to make their commission, make their money, because that's what they're doing it for, right? And generally speaking, the great managers, you know, the raw powers and the, you know, the great people, you know, they know that they've got to do their best for their clients. So what's best for the client is best for them. You know, I worked for Miles Copeland, who managed the Police and Sting, and, you know, we were incredibly successful. And every decision that Miles made or advised the band on was far better for the band than it was for him, because they were getting all the money. He was only getting the management commission. So it wasn't beneficial to him. He never made a deal that wasn't best for the artist.
I guess overall that's what makes a good manager, and that's
absolutely,
if the bigger the band gets, that's going to rub off on the manager, even if they don't have a direct revenue stream from that particular deal. Like, it's going to elevate what they do and who they work with and everything around them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, again, the complication of all of these relationships, right, is that, you know, if you think about a band, that's usually three or four people who've kind of known each other for a long while, you know, and they're usually younger and they haven't got real life yet, right? And the dream is still there that, you know, we might be in the Black Heart tonight, but we'll be at Coco next week. It'll be great, you know. Don't worry, it's all going to go great. And a manager is a stranger. You know, a manager is someone who comes into that world and they have to trust, right? So these relationships, you know, people expect so much of relationships in the music industry, but essentially it's a bunch of strangers coming together, isn't it? To try and come up with, you know, something fantastic, you know. So, choose wisely, you know, you have to, you know, this is a really difficult business.
Does it make a difference to the record label who the manager is and whether they've got one? Like, if you have a band come to you and they do have someone like Raw Power, does that make you take it more seriously and think this is more of a chance? Or
you would be lying if you said that you didn't, right? You know, because, you know, what's the thing that every band needs? Every band needs to, you know, get gigs, right? So, you know, the more powerful your management is, the more chance that they might be able to shoehorn you in to the agent that is booking the big band and say, well, look, do us a favor, you know, get us a bunch of supports here or whatever. So yeah, the power of a manager is good. But in the case of a band like Jen and the Degenerates, who we're, you know, really starting to do really well with now, and there's a real kind of buzz on their record at the moment, the manager's been part of that journey from the start, and he's not a made guy. He's not, you know, he's not come from a major management company, but we love him because he goes out and does his best to advocate for the band and turns up and drives them to gigs or whatever it is, you know. So, you know, to me, you know, again, it's like there's no rules, you know. It's if we turned around and said, well, we're not going to work with anyone unless they're managed by one of the top 5 management companies, we wouldn't have any clients, right? Because, you know, or any bands, because you'd say, well, hey, well, you know, that band haven't got those things, right? But we are different. But I know a lot of majors, for instance, are very concerned about who the manager is, because the majors will be like going, well, look, you know, why haven't they got a good manager? If we're signing them, they need to have a good manager. So quite often, you know what happens, right? You know, band gets to the first level and the guy who's driven them to all the gigs stayed up all night, you know, risked divorce from his wife, and missed his kids' birthdays to go to the Black Heart on a Sunday, has been pushed out because a bigger management company come along and go, look, we can take you to the next level. Yeah, it's like I said, I mean, you can't. The motivation for artists is to succeed.
Yeah, of course.
So good management comes in all shapes and sizes. I've seen managers who started with nothing and who've become great managers, and I've seen big management companies do a shit job, so what can you say? Yeah, not mention any names.
Would the label be looking at the whole, like if it was a major, would they be looking at the whole team and wanting to be interested in who's involved, or would they want to put their own team around them?
No, they wouldn't want to put their own team around. They will look carefully at who's involved. So, if it's a good band, and it's, coming from a place where that particular manager might have 2 or 3 other artists who are, already established, they're definitely more interested, for sure, But it doesn't, as we said, it doesn't guarantee anything. Just would be more attractive. Certainly for some labels, I certainly would say for the most part, any major label or major indie would be far more interested if there's a decent manager involved.
So just getting then into a bit of your background, obviously you've been involved in music for a very long time. So how did you get involved, and what was the motivation to get involved? How did you start?
Exactly the same as everyone else. Picking up a guitar when I was 13 or whatever at school, getting into a band with 2 guys who were in the same school but were older than me, and I managed to then persuade them to let me play guitar with them. And that motivation that you have, when you fall in love with music, which, is why we're all here, that just takes over everything, So my schoolboy dreams of Jimi Hendrix and Deep Purple and Sabbath and all those great artists that were around in the early 70s when I kind of really got interested, led to me, being in the band. So around about 75, 76, we were actually a proper band and playing in pubs and, writing some songs and doing that stuff. And in 77, punk exploded onto the scene. So we definitely went from Thin Lizzy to The Clash in a short space of time, right? Because everyone did, and especially in London, punk rock exploded, and it was the most exciting, visceral, incredible thing. So, Menace was born, and we went and got gigs and hustled gigs at the Roxy Club and the Vortex and got those gigs. And eventually Miles Copeland, who was making records, as I said, he sort of had the sort of fledgling labels, which, had different bands. Like he had the first Police record on Illegal Records, and I think he'd released Alternative TV and a bunch of really cool indie singles. And he came to the Roxy Club and saw our band. But what we didn't know is he'd had a booking at a studio in London, because he was making records with bands, that the band that he had planned to record had pulled out. So he came to the Roxy Club, saw us, and went, oh, they're not bad. Came backstage and literally said to us, in his American accent, you guys, you want to make a record? And we were like, well, yeah, one day, of course, yeah. And it was like, no, you want to make a record now? I'll put you in the studio tomorrow. And we were like, what? And he said, yeah, Pathway Studios. It's where Squeeze just made the record, and do you want to do it? And we were like, all right. So we rocked up without a contract into Pathway Studios, which is no longer there, but was 8-track studio where a lot of bands, Dire Straits, Elvis Costello, loads of bands made records there. And we cut a couple of sides, and it was like, wow, we now got a record deal. And he invited us down to the offices in Dryden Chambers, where Sex Pistols had an office. And next thing you know, we were on illegal records. So that was how I kind of got into, you know, releasing music. And then he, in 1979, asked me if I wanted to work at the label. And I was still in the band, but we'd parted company with him, and we'd made a couple of singles elsewhere. And he said to me, in his brutal style, "It's not really happening for you, is it, Steve?" And I was like, "Well, you know, we're still going, you know." And he's like, "Why don't you come and work for me?" And I was like, he said, "Look, you know, you'd be selling your own records." So anyway, I took the plunge, gave up my job as a forklift truck driver and part-time budding musician star, and went to work, you know, putting records in sleeves and taking them to rough trade and selling, you know, vinyl to anyone who wanted it. And that's how I got into the record business.
So how did that then develop from you just putting CDs in packs? Well, 7 inches, yeah.
Man, come out there. That was that's where the benefit of having a great mentor really comes in, because Mars Copeland was an entrepreneur, is still alive, obviously. And so his whole modus operandi was very much, I've got to get stuff done, so who can do it, right? So, you know, he was that guy who would, you know, anything that needed doing, who could do it? And I was naive enough to say, well, I'll give it a go. And that's what led me to signing my first band. And when I signed The Alarm, who were basically just, you know, 4 kids who moved to London from North Wales and were playing shows around, and, you know, this was in the 80s, 83, something like that, 82 maybe. So started in 79 doing just general Dog's Body work. In, you know, 82, I think it was, I asked him if I could sign a band, saw this band, The Alarm, and within 6 months we'd had a hit record, you know, and I was down at Top of the Pops watching the band, you know, performing, you know, got to number 17 in the charts and, you know, number 6 in the album charts. So all of a sudden it was like, wow, Steve Tannett is an A&R guy. He's not just a guy who works at the record label. He signed the band, you know. So it was that kind of journey, really. You know, everything just, you know, fell into place.
What does that mean for you as the A&R guy if the band is successful? Like, are you part of their career? Do you stay with them? Do you take a commission from the label, or?
No. I was just on a wage, you know, so it's just my job. You know, I was didn't know any better. You know, it's like, okay, got a really big hit record there, Steve. You know, we're getting loads of money through the door. Does that mean I get any more money? You know, so, you know, you don't necessarily have a correlation. But yeah, it benefits you, obviously, because your reputation as somebody who can spot a good band, for instance, is greatly enhanced, isn't it? You know, as they say, nothing succeeds like success. So being part of the journey of a band, no matter where they get to, if they do get to some level of success and you're associated to that, then yeah, that really helps you. You know, not from a financial standpoint, other than might increase your employability, you know, as somebody who might have some knowledge in the music industry. But,
so would you have signed them? Is that sort of like the end of your involvement with the band, or?
No, I think that's the thing about A&R. You know, the great A&R guys are on that journey with the band. You know, they are at the recording sessions. You know, I was present when The Alarm were recording 68 Guns at Abbey Road. I was in the room, you know, and I like to, you know, it's changed now for me, obviously, with my journey now is, director of music platforms at Marshall. I've got a team, so when Nova Twins recorded their album, I was not in, they were in our studio, but I wasn't sitting in the room like that. I was around, but they were making their music, and that's how it is these days. Artists have much more control over what they're doing. They don't need an A&R guy going, I don't think that's quite good enough, and of course we've created an environment at Marshall where, we've built a brilliant recording studio to allow bands that are with the label to really figure out how to make records and get good at it. So yeah, the A&R process, is different, for everyone. I'm definitely an enthusiastic supporter of talent, but I don't sit and tell anyone what to do.
Just touching back then in on Marshall Records, because that obviously hasn't launched in the traditional sort of manner. How did you get involved in setting that up, and how did it get set up?
Well, that's interesting in its own right, because I met somebody who was making a record for a band, and they were in Abbey Road Studios, and I was working with a legendary drummer called Ginger Baker, who unfortunately passed away. But he, long story short, I was in Abbey Road, and I ran into this guy, and he said he was making a record for a band, and Marshall Amplification were paying for it. And I said, oh, Marshall, do they have a record label? And he said, no, they've just given me some money to make the record with this band called King Creature. And I said, why would they do that? They're just giving them the money. And I thought, that sounds a bit odd. So anyway, I managed to then get a meeting with the head of Marshall, and I said, why have you given that band the money to make a record? What do you want from them? They said, well, we just want to help them. And I said, well, why don't you, if you're willing to just give the money to the band, why don't you invest in setting up a record label? Then you can really help the bands, and you've got a motivation then to support the band and then help them grow. And then they'll hopefully be more loyal to the brand, right? And so they said, okay, what does that look like? Because we don't know anything about how that works. And I said, well, I do, because that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years or whatever, right? So I then put together a proposal, and Marshall liked it, and we then started working together on developing a record label concept. It's changed considerably in the last 7 years. The company has changed itself, and it's now a much bigger company. It's called the Marshall Group now, and we built a recording studio. But essentially it stems from Marshall being a company that obviously has a very big global footprint, not just in amps, but in headphones, in Bluetooth speakers. As a lifestyle brand, it's growing every day, and it's an incredibly successful company. So at the heart of it is musicians. There is no guitar players unless there are guitar players. There's no amps, right? No one's going to buy an amp if there are no guitar players. So Marshall's ethos really is about trying to, where it can, because it can't do everything, but where it can, support artists developing talent, not just in the UK, but in, global markets now, and really support as many artist journeys as we can in whatever way we can. And we, that means work with the Music Venue Trust. That means work with education, to give people an opportunity to understand about how the music business works, in our building a recording studio, and, giving, really favorable deals to artists. We don't recoup recording costs a lot of the time. And, we're really all about the artists. That's really what Marshall is. And that's really how it started, So I've been very lucky that, with the changes at Marshall, the support has always been there for supporting new talent and on their journey.
One of the things that I think Marshall have done with the label over the last few years is sort of got much more modern. It looked at the start like you were signing more of a classic rock type band, more of the...
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, when it started, you know, you got to remember that it started with me and an idea, and I knew about distribution, I knew about setting up a record label, how it works, and making record deals, but I didn't really know the scene that well in the sense that obviously we wanted to put out guitar-based music,
Yeah.
but I think what's happened as the company has grown over the last 6 or 7 years is we've had great people working for the company who've been able to go, there's this really good band that you should do, or we should look at this band, or let's go out and see this band, and they're really good. So I think, yeah, we're like anything. We've developed, I think, our attitude to rock alternative, because that is really where we sit, you know, is that, you know, we think it's important that, you know, there is, you know, an inclusive, you know, safe environment for musicians, whether you're black, white, queer, all of it. For us, we have to, you know, and we love to support everybody. So, you know, we have some incredible artists. You know, I've got a fantastic artist called Kid Bookie on the label who is completely bonkers, but I just fell in love with him. You know, he walked in the office and just basically said, I fucking love your fucking company. And I said, you don't know us. And he went, yeah, but I still fucking think I love you. And I said, what do you want? He said, well, I want to be on your label. I said, all right, well, you're on the label then. And we signed him on the spot, literally. I literally just shook his hand. You know, he walked in, he said, what, am I going to be on Marshall now? And I said, yeah.
Awesome. So we really like him, Bucky. We're actually looking at signing him for the publishing.
He's fantastic. He's he's genius. And we've allowed him the freedom to make this album, and he's, you know, spent a long time over it and didn't put any pressure on him at all. And it's absolutely brilliant record. We're just blown away by it. Most of it made at Marshall. So, yeah, that kind of attitude, you know, Dream Nails, you know, sort of punk, queer, female, non-binary band who just defy any kind of pigeonholing, but, you know, they feel very safe with us and they know we have no interest to tell them what to do. We just want to help them and enhance whatever it is that they're doing. So we have a really open door policy. You know, we're definitely not, oh, well, we only do this or we only do that. You know, I think the new punk rock, you know, that is happening has really something I predicted from the pandemic. I thought there would be an explosion of guitar bands, and here we are. You know, punk is right at the top of the agenda, isn't it? You know, there's so many great bands. I'll be seeing one of our own bands tonight, Noah and the Loners, who are on Six Music playlist, believe it or not. And that's a band who are just reaching, yeah, I think they're now 18, 19. But I signed them when they were 17 and barely could they play, you know, but now they're fantastic and done tons of shows. They're at 100 Club tonight, and absolutely so blown away by their development and journey. And they're a punk rock band, you know, noisy, sweary, annoying punk rock band. So, well, we just love the energy of young musicians. That's what.
If you got a band, because you just mentioned there, you don't tell them what to do. If you signed them and you signed them for a particular reason, you'd heard an EP or something, and you're like, we really like this, what they're doing and the direction they're going in. If then once they started recording, it completely changed, and you were like, this really isn't what we thought we were buying, where would you draw the line at wanting to get involved? And
well, that's an interesting one as well, right? Because after 45 years, I'm not saying I know what a hit record sounds like or anything like that, right? But I do have an idea when something is right. And there is one of our bands who I let do what they wanted to do. And there was a few things with the record that I wasn't happy with. Now, I did say to them, you don't have to listen to me, but if I was you, what I would do is I would take that bit out there and I would shorten that bit there, and I would definitely take out that swear word there, and they were a bit miffed about it, right? And they were like, oh, I didn't think you were going to tell us what to do. I said, I'm not telling you what to do. I'm giving you my advice. Anyway, they followed my advice, and that song's on 1.3 million Spotify streams and does 10,000 a week, and has actually been really part of what has helped their journey and started making things happen for the band. Now, they actually wrote a song for their album that talks about that, because, they were very miffed that I interjected. But what I said to them is, look, I think you've got something good. It's just not right. If you make it, if you just do a couple of tweaks, then I think it might be better. And now, of course, they're saying, well, I have to say, yeah, I'm glad we listened to you. All right. So at the end of the day, I don't want to tell anyone what to do, but I will advise people, where I can.
Yeah, I guess when you're able to collaborate, it's just going to be more productive overall.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, people, also musicians want, they want security. They want to feel that they've got the approval. There's so many bands that I love, right? That, having any chance to be a part of that journey is such a privilege, and so for me, it's like, well, look, let's all have as much fun as we can have, right? And what happens, right? And if it don't work, hey, whatever, right? Marshall's still going to be here. Don't worry about it. You go off and do something else, right? But, we're for the most part, we've had really, really joyous relationships with our artists. And, I did 2 albums with Prestamico, and, they're a band that I absolutely adored, like musically, just completely off the scale geniuses. But we couldn't find that door to open for them to go to that next level as a band. Now, Luke's in Unpeople, and it's great, and I love them, and I wish them the best, but I look at those two records that I did with Prestamico, which I had nothing to do with musically at all. I mean, they made their own, who, you can't interfere with that, right? It is what it is. And I kept saying, oh my God, this is so close. This is so close. This is so great. But it just never found that sweet spot where it would sit right on all those big playlists or on radio stations. And so I think, if I'd have interfered with that, maybe I could have pushed them round into a slightly more commercial sound, but it wasn't my job. That's not what we're here to do. Just here to help if we can.
So just before we finish off then, if there's some new bands watching and they want a record deal with Marshall, where do they need to get to before?
Well, the good news is we're really easy to get hold of, right? Because, steve.tannett@marshall.com is not a difficult thing, right? And, the marshall.com world is, you go onto our website, there's loads of contact information and so on and so forth. We listen to everything, no matter what. I mean, we've had, incredible submissions, and some bands, I've met with probably most of the bands that you are seeing on festivals right now. Sometimes, we've offered deals and we haven't been able to get it over the line. All right. A couple of big bands I could name, I'm not going to, who just we couldn't make a deal. And I think, fuck, they'd be so great with us, but they're doing brilliantly now and selling shit tons of records and tickets, right? We can't do everything for everybody, right? If you send us music and we don't dig it, that's just life, right? I mean, it's like people go, oh, but you said you really want to help like developing artists. Yeah, we do. We want to help the ones that
you like.
We can help.
Yeah.
What I mean? You can't do everything, can you? So, but our door is open, man, and we're at all the festivals, all our people will be at Great Escape, 2000 Trees, you know, people just, we know most people can, people are always, we're always approachable, and everybody who works at Marshall, certainly on the side of, on the music platforms, marketing and artist relations, you know, we are really, open people. We're definitely approachable. Yeah, we want to hear music from wherever it comes. So, yeah.
Awesome. I think that's pretty much it for us today then. Just before we finish, are there any tags you want to push?
Marshall.com. Marshall.com. Right, let's hit some bands, right? Okay, Nova Twins, obviously. Everyone, I think we're really proud of what we've done so far with them. There's a new band that has just won something called The Deal, which we do with Kerrang, called Malavora, and they are really, really awesome hard rock, kind of alternative band. Jen and the Degenerates, that's a brilliant album. Anti-Fun Propaganda, we had 4-star, 5 stars in Kerrang this week. I mean, like, brilliant album. And loads of stuff, really, but yeah, just keep checking out Marshall.com. It's a really fantastic company and loads of cool stuff happening.
Awesome. Thank you very much. For everyone else that's watching or listening, follow, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. If you do want to watch us, we are on YouTube. Thanks, guys.